My name is Tina Harrison. I'm 29 years old, and I learned the hard way that nothing poisons a family faster than money, especially when they think you didn't earn it. I didn't come from privilege. None of us did. My childhood was the kind where you shared bedrooms with siblings, taped the soles of hand-me-down sneakers back together, and pretended not to notice the price tags still stuck to thrift store sweaters. Our cabinets were always stocked with bulk cereal, our holiday gifts wrapped in Sunday newspaper, and the nicest thing anyone owned was the family photo album my mother guarded like a relic. We all grew up the same way, or at least I thought we did. While my cousins spent their college years partying on borrowed money and posting designer shoes on Instagram, I spent mine hunched over an aging laptop coding until my wrists ached. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't the type to brag. I was the girl in oversized hoodies eating vending machine pretzels at 2 a.m. while debugging a feature no one believed in except me. I built a tiny software startup with 3 equally exhausted friends. We had no office, no investors, and no idea what we were doing. We worked anywhere with Wi-Fi laundromats, bus stations, library corners that smelled like old carpet. I took online classes in marketing and finance, not because I wanted to, but because I had to, because failure would mean crawling back to the same limits I'd fought so hard to escape. Fast forward 5 years. The scrappy little startup got bought out by a mid-sized tech company. The payout changed everything. I can't name the figure, but my share alone was in the 8-digit range. Life-changing money. Freedom money. The kind of money that makes people around you shift, not because you changed, but because they did. I didn't run out and buy a mansion or a flashy car. I moved into a modest penthouse, chose simple furniture, and quietly invested in small companies I believed in. I stayed under the radar. If you knew, you knew. If you didn't, I wasn't going to announce it. My parents never asked me for a cent. My mother, a second-grade teacher with a gentle soul, cried when I paid off her mortgage. My father, a stoic ex-army man who now works construction, just clapped my shoulder and said, "Good. Now you can finally take your mother out for real steak." They never changed. But the rest of my extended family, that was a different story. It started with jokes, little comments dipped in acid. At Thanksgiving, my Uncle Brian raised his glass and said, "Look at our tech queen over here. Maybe we should start charging her rent for breathing the same air." Everyone laughed. I forced myself to laugh too, even as something in his tone made the room feel colder. Then the request began, wrapped in humor, but sharp underneath. "You know, Tina, you could help your cousins. College isn't cheap. Take us on a family vacation sometime. Let us see what first class looks like for once. Or my personal favorite, success looks good on you, but generosity looks even better." I ignored them. I tried to be patient. I told myself they didn't mean harm. The only one who didn't ask for anything was Liam. 17 years old, quiet, artistic, a little odd in ways that made me like him instantly. While everyone else obsessed over social status and appearances, Liam drew on his sneakers, carried a sketchbook everywhere, and knew more about mythology than football. He reminded me of who I used to be before money twisted the way people looked at me. Then my mother told me Liam was working part-time at a hardware store, juggling school, saving every cent for art school. His parents weren't helping him, especially not Brian, who thought art was a waste of time. My blood boiled. I remembered what it felt like to chase a dream no one believed in. I wasn't going to let him fight alone. So I made a plan for his birthday in July. Nothing flashy, just a card. Inside it, a personal check for $10,000. A beginning. Enough for supplies, early tuition room for hope. I wrote a note. "Use this to build something beautiful. Don't let anyone tell you your art doesn't matter. With love, Tina." The birthday gathering was small. Backyard barbecue, plastic chairs, cheap balloons taped to a fence. I came in jeans and a simple top, hoping to blend in. No such luck. My aunts gave me smiles too wide to be real. My uncles nodded stiffly. My cousins stared openly at my watch. One whispered, "That's a designer piece, right?" I ignored it. I wasn't here for them. Liam's face lit up when he saw me. He thanked me for coming and slipped the card into his pocket like it was treasure. I felt something warm settle in my chest. Finally, something good. And then it happened. Uncle Brian spotted the card sticking out of Liam's pocket. He snatched it before Liam could react, opened it, read the check. His face twisted, not in confusion, but in disgust. The whole backyard fell silent. Brian held the check up like it was poison and shouted, "What the hell is this?" Liam stammered, "It's from Tina. It's for art school." Brian's lip curled. "We don't need your pity money." Then before I could even move, he tore the check in half. right down the middle, right in front of me, right in front of Liam. The sound was so small, so soft, and yet it felt deafening. Liam's face crumpled. He didn't even blink. His hands lifted halfway as if reaching for something he wasn't sure he had permission to want. My mother gasped. My father clenched his jaw. And me. I didn't shout, didn't cry, didn't storm off. I just stood there, completely still, completely calm. Because in that exact moment, something shifted inside me. Not anger, not heartbreak, something colder, sharper. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about respect, about cruelty, about a man who enjoyed holding power over anyone weaker than him, including his own son. I looked at the torn halves of the check fluttering to the grass, and I smiled, because that was the moment I knew I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to send another check. I wasn't going to walk away and pretend this never happened. That was the moment the seed was planted. And over the next few weeks, I would quietly, carefully, deliberately water it until it grew into something Brian never saw coming. Something that would take everything he thought he controlled and place it in my hands instead. I woke up the next morning expecting anger to hit me like a freight train. The late sting of humiliation, the ache of watching Liam's face fall apart in real time. But instead, I felt something else, something steady, a kind of clarity that made everything sharper. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. "Tina, your Uncle Brian called me this morning. He said you're trying to buy Liam's loyalty. He said you're trying to turn him against his own father." I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. Brian had always been the type who needed the world to revolve around him. The type of man who confused control with love, obedience with respect, fear with parenting. But accusing me of manipulation, that wasn't about me. That was about protecting his ego from the truth that his son looked up to someone else. I typed back, "Don't worry about it, Mom." And I meant it. For now. Over the next 2 weeks, the family grapevine, which was usually good for nothing except gossip and unnecessary drama, delivered news that made my stomach twist. First from Aunt Marie. He threw away Liam's sketchbooks. Then from my mother. He said art was a phase, that Liam needed to get serious. Then the worst one. He smashed Liam's laptop, literally took it into the garage and broke it on the floor. I felt the blood leave my face. All those drawings, those digital pieces, his portfolio, his essays, his applications, gone, destroyed not by accident but by intention. And it wasn't just physical destruction. It was psychological warfare. Brian had told Liam to pack a bag and see how far your cartoons get you. Liam had run away for a day, biked to a friend's house 2 towns over, slept on a couch. No one knew where he was. When he came home, he didn't yell, he didn't argue, he didn't fight. He just went quiet. That kind of quiet terrified me. It was the quiet of a kid learning to disappear inside himself. The same quiet I remembered from my own childhood, the one that lived in the corners of my mind when people told me I would never make anything of myself. I called Liam that night. He answered on the 3rd ring. His voice was thin, tired, like a string pulled too tight. "Hey," I said softly, "are you okay?" A long pause. Then yeah, it's whatever. Those 3 words broke something in me. "This isn't whatever, Liam," I said. "What he did was cruel. I don't want to make things worse," he whispered. "He's already mad I applied to schools." That's when I realized it wasn't just the check or the birthday or the jealousy. Brian wasn't afraid Liam would fail. He was afraid Liam would succeed without him. He couldn't stand that his son had dreams that didn't fit inside Brian's narrow idea of what real life should be. He couldn't stand that someone else believed in Liam more than he did. And instead of taking responsibility for his own insecurities, he punished Liam for daring to hope. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breath. "Tina," Liam asked quietly. "I'm here," I said, "and I'm not going anywhere." Because I couldn't. Not anymore. Not after this. 2 days later, the universe handed me something unexpected. I was sitting in my living room reviewing emails when I noticed a familiar logo on a report, the company name printed on my Uncle Brian's work shirt. Fairway Logistics, a small regional distributor with outdated facilities and old leadership. They'd been around forever, supplying offices, schools, and hospitals with basic equipment, the kind of company no one thinks about until the copier paper runs out. I knew nothing about them except that Brian had been there almost 20 years and wore his position like a crown. Curious, I dug deeper. The numbers shocked me. Fairway was drowning, losing contracts, bleeding cash, barely staying afloat. Their valuation had dropped so low that a single investor with enough liquidity could realistically acquire the company. My breath caught. It wasn't just an opportunity. It was alignment. Perfect, terrifying alignment. The universe might as well have handed me a map with an X drawn over Brian's pride. But this wasn't about revenge in the theatrical sense. I wasn't planning to march into his job and scream until someone escorted me out. I wasn't fantasizing about dramatic showdowns or public humiliation. If I did this, it would be legal, precise, and unshakable. A move he couldn't tear in half. The kind of revenge that reshapes the ground beneath someone's feet without raising your voice. The kind of revenge you don't commit out of anger, but out of purpose. So I made a few calls to contacts I'd met over the years, to investors who owed me favors, to analysts who knew how to dig quietly. One in particular, a woman named Tara, sent me a file that made my jaw drop. Fairway Logistics wasn't just struggling. They were actively looking for a buyer. Multiple offers had fallen through. Their valuation had dipped again. They were on the verge of collapse. I leaned back stunned. If I wanted to take control of the company that my uncle built his entire identity around, I could. If I wanted to pull the rug out from under him legally, quietly, with a signature instead of a scream, I could. But I didn't decide immediately. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about Liam. This was about a kid whose dreams were crushed, not because they were unrealistic, but because his father needed him small. This was about giving him, maybe for the first time in his life, a win. A real win. So I took a breath, and I said out loud to no one but myself, "Okay, let's begin." That night I opened my laptop, formed a shell company, hired a legal team, brought in consultants, started the acquisition process through intermediaries so no one would know it was me. The plan was simple. Acquire the company, take control, fix what needed fixing, protect the people worth protecting. And one day, not immediately, not impulsively, look Brian in the eye and let him see exactly who held the power now. Not out of spite, out of balance, out of justice, out of the unspoken promise I made to Liam the night he whispered, "It's whatever," like he had already accepted, the world would never choose him. I chose him. For once someone had to. And if that meant stepping into a war I never asked for, so be it. The acquisition process moved faster than even I expected. Fairway Logistics was desperate, which meant they were willing to entertain almost any serious offer. Through my intermediaries, the company I created, Northcrest Acquisitions, positioned itself as an investor group interested in modernizing a struggling regional distributor. Not a hostile takeover, not a predatory buyout. Just interest. Fairway jumped at this chance before even asking too many questions. Within 6 weeks, the paperwork was drafted. Within 8, I had quietly absorbed their debt. By week 10, I owned 51% of the company. I became their majority stakeholder without a single person realizing whose signature was behind Northcrest Acquisitions. It was clean, strategic, and absolutely legal. The day I signed the final document, I sat in my penthouse alone, staring at the skyline. It should have felt triumphant. The kind of victory movies try to dramatize with orchestral music and slow-motion shots. But it didn't. It felt heavy, not wrong, just heavy. Because while Brian had spent years swinging his authority like a hammer, I had never chased power. I had chased survival ambition and eventually independence. But not this, not revenge. And yet here I was, holding the company his entire identity was built on. The irony wasn't lost on me. 2 days later, I walked into Fairway Logistics headquarters for the first time. I didn't come in a luxury car. I didn't wear a designer suit. I didn't stride in like a woman on a mission. I took the subway, wore a simple button-down and slacks, walked through the front door like any other new hire. The receptionist didn't look up. New onboarding. Something like that, I said with a small smile. She waved me toward the elevators. No one recognized me. No one whispered. No one stared. It was a strangely grounding sensation to walk into a company you technically owned and have the freedom of invisibility. The all-staff meeting was set for 10:30. By 10:28, the large conference room was already filled. Employees murmured questions among themselves. The rumor mill was working overtime. Bankruptcy. Restructuring a merger. I slipped in quietly and stood near the back, watching as more people entered. Then Brian walked in. He had shaved, wore a new tie, looked around with the air of a man who believed he was indispensable. He hadn't seen me yet. When he did, it was only fleeting a glance in my direction, not recognition. I was just another face in the crowd to him. A woman in a soft blue blouse, arms crossed calm, unnoticed. The irony again. At exactly 10:30, one of the board members walked to the front of the room. "Good morning, everyone. As you all know, Fairway Logistics has finalized its acquisition by Northcrest Acquisitions. Today you'll be meeting our new acting CEO. People exchanged anxious looks. The board member gestured toward me. Tina Harrison. I stepped forward, and Brian froze. I saw it the moment recognition punched the air out of his lungs. His eyes widened. A red flush crawled up his neck. His posture stiffened like a coiled spring. Tina, he said, voice thick with disbelief. Good morning, I replied calmly. He stood abruptly, almost knocking over the chair. This is a joke. It's not, I said softly. Please sit down. He didn't move at first. His jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. But the room was silent, dozens of eyes watching him. Slowly tense as a drawn bowstring, he lowered himself into the chair. I turned toward the staff and began. Thank you all for being here. Fairway Logistics is entering a new chapter, one focused on modernization, accountability, and growth. I'm here to rebuild, not replace, and I'm looking forward to working with every one of you. Applause rippled through the room, hesitant at first, then stronger. Brian was stone still. I continued with restructuring plans, improved systems, new initiatives, and departmental assessments. I didn't rush. I didn't flaunt anything. I simply led. Every now and then, I felt Brian's eyes burning into me, a mixture of panic, outrage, and disbelief. But I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. This wasn't a performance. This was reclamation. After the meeting, people approached me, some nervous, some hopeful, some cautiously optimistic. We shook hands, exchanged names, talked briefly about their departments. Then, when the room had thinned out, Brian approached. His voice was low-strained. How long have you been planning this? I met his gaze evenly. Long enough. You can't just walk in here and play boss. It's not play, Brian, I said. The acquisition was legal, transparent, clean. Everything you see here was built above board. He stared, trembling just slightly. This company is my life, he hissed. No, I replied with calm finality. This company was your job. There's a difference. He took a step closer. You think you can cut me out? I don't think, I said quietly. I know. His face contorted. A storm of humiliation and fury twisted behind his eyes. But I didn't escalate. I didn't raise my voice. I simply added, This isn't personal, Brian. Not yet. His breath hitched. Not yet. We'll address your department soon. For now, let's stay professional. He left the room stiffly, shoulders tight, fists clenched, the picture of a man whose world had tilted without warning. It would have been satisfying if it weren't so tragic. Because this wasn't the moment of revenge. It wasn't even close. It was just the first shift in power, the quiet kind that settles into the walls before the real storm arrives. Later that afternoon, I called Liam. He answered immediately. It's done, I told him. What is? I took over Fairway. Silence. Not shock, just processing. And my dad knows. Yes. Another quiet moment. Tina, he began slowly, I don't want you doing all this for me. I'm not, I said. I'm doing this because you deserved better a long time ago. I could hear him breathe out a soft exhale. Do you want to meet for lunch tomorrow, I asked. We don't have to talk about anything heavy. Yes, he said quietly. I'd like that. The next day we met at a quiet cafe on the east side. He looked thinner than I remembered, more cautious. But when he sat down across from me, some of the tension eased from his shoulders. We talked for an hour, not about Brian, not about the company, but about art ideas, projects, dreams. I showed him a productivity app I'd rebuilt the night before, a forgotten side project from my early startup days. His eyes lit up. You made this? A long time ago, I said. I forgot why I started. Now I remember. He nodded, thoughtful. I've been sketching again, he whispered. Just not showing anyone yet. I'd love to see it when you're ready. He didn't promise anything, but I saw something flicker in his expression, something alive. A beginning. Before we parted, he asked quietly, Do you ever get tired of winning? I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it struck a chord deep inside me. All the time, I said. But success isn't winning. It's building something no one can take from you. A version of yourself no one gets to tear in half. Liam looked down at his drink, then nodded. And in that small cafe, sunlight pooling across the table, I realized the truth. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding him, the company, and maybe even myself. But revenge was coming. Not loud, not violent, not chaotic. Silent, surgical, inevitable. The days that followed felt strangely calm, like the quiet before a storm. Not the chaotic, lightning-splitting sky kind of storm, the slow, deliberate kind that rolls in silently, swallowing the horizon one dark cloud at a time. Fairway Logistics had always been a stagnant organism, dusty, underfunded, filled with routines that hadn't changed since the early 2000s. But once I took control, the shift began immediately. New systems, new protocols, digital upgrades, updated safety measures, clearer communication channels. Employees who had spent years being overlooked began to come alive. Warehouse staff stood taller. Customer service reps asked sharper questions. Department leads pitched ideas they'd been too afraid to share before. The one person who didn't adapt, Brian. He lingered like a stain everyone avoided. At first, he tried to act unaffected. Shoulders squared, chin, lifted ego, dragging intact behind him like a worn-out cape. He strutted through hallways, barking orders as if nothing had changed. But people no longer jumped at his voice. They didn't fear him anymore. They feared silence from the new CEO far more. Once he realized his authority no longer held weight, panic began to seep through the cracks. He started sending me emails. Formal ones. "Tina, please update me on equipment orders. I need to be included in restructuring meetings. Why haven't I received departmental updates?" I responded politely every time. Short, professional, never rude, never emotional. Just enough to keep him sweating. When the emails stopped working, he tried something else. He came to my office. The knock was sharp, annoyed, impatient. "Come in," I said without looking up. Brian entered stiff as a board, jaw clenched so tightly I could practically hear his teeth grinding. He didn't sit. "I feel like I'm being kept out of the loop," he said, voice shallow. I finally looked up. "In what way?" He huffed through his toes. "I've been with this company nearly 2 decades. I've led operations in 3 regions. I deserve to know what direction we're headed in." "You're right," I said. "You do deserve clarity." His shoulders eased slightly. "We'll be distributing departmental updates by next quarter, once the new structure is finalized." He blinked, confused. "Next quarter. That's months away." "I'm aware." "So that's it," he snapped. "You're cutting me out." "No one is cutting anything," I replied calmly. "You're still employed, still drawing a salary. We're simply assessing which roles best fit our future." He stared at me with a mix of fury and disbelief. Then abruptly he stood. "I see how it is." But he didn't, not yet. He stormed out and I let him go. Because the real blow hadn't landed. The reckoning hadn't even begun. That night, frustrated and boiling beneath the surface, I went back into Fairway's old servers, a digital graveyard of outdated systems and sloppy email logs. I wasn't sure what I was looking for at first. I just knew something felt off. And then I found it. On an archive server buried under folders titled Things Like Old Ops and Temp Storage 2016, I found email chains between Brian and a vendor I didn't recognize. Nothing unusual at first glance, until I noticed the amounts, the frequency, the inflated invoices. And then, the address, a P.O. box, registered under the name Ashley Whitman, Brian's wife. I froze. I opened more files. Every one of them told the same story. Fake shipments, ghost maintenance work, inflated orders, thousands of dollars funneled quietly into a shell company. Signed off by Brian. Suddenly, the arrogance made sense. So did the entitlement. So did his rage when I took over. He wasn't just a bad father or a petty man. He was a thief. He had been stealing from Fairway for years, feeding his pride with money he didn't work for. I pulled in legal and compliance. Quietly. No leaks, no rumors. A full internal audit began. But revenge wasn't just about evidence. It was about timing, presentation, impact. I wasn't going to march down to his office and shout. I wasn't going to confront him in private. I wasn't going to give him time to hide. The truth would come out in the one place he cared about most, in front of everyone. Meanwhile, the company transformed. I promoted people Brian had ignored for years, workers who knew the systems better than managers who only pretended. The warehouse team once overlooked became the backbone of operations again. Designers, analysts, customer service reps, all began taking pride in their work. Fairway wasn't just functioning. It was coming alive. Word got around. And eventually, Liam heard about it. He came by one Thursday afternoon. Not formally, not as an intern or new hire. Just to visit. He spent time with the design department, sat quietly in meetings, watched the creative process like a kid staring through glass at a world he'd never been allowed to enter. He held a tablet I'd bought him, nothing extravagant, just something functional, something that belonged to him alone. He looked lighter that day, taller. And then it happened. Brian saw him. I was in the hallway when it unfolded. Brian stepped out of the break room, coffee in hand, smirk on his face, until his eyes landed on Liam standing with a junior designer discussing color palettes. Brian froze. Liam froze. The designer blinked between them. "You two know each other?" Brian didn't answer her. He stepped forward, jaw tight. "What the hell are you doing here?" Liam's shoulders caved inward like he was shrinking. "Answer me," Brian snapped. I walked forward before Liam could speak. "Is there a problem, Brian?" He turned on me. "Why is he here?" "He's shadowing the design team today," I said. We're sponsoring a mentorship program for young creatives. This is a workplace, Brian hissed, not a damn art club. I held his stare. It can be both. His eyes burned. You did this to spite me. No, I said softly, you did this to yourself. He opened his mouth, closed it, then spun on his heel and stomped away. Liam exhaled shakily. You okay? I asked. He nodded, but his hands trembled slightly as he clutched the tablet. I wanted to hug him. Instead, I simply said, keep going. And he did. That night, I crafted the setup for the endgame. A quarterly all-hands meeting. Required attendance, mandatory presentations, department updates. Everyone would be there, including Brian. He didn't know it yet, but his entire world was about to collapse. Not because I hated him, not because I wanted to destroy him, but because he had been destroying others for years, Liam most of all. And someone finally had to pull the curtain back. Not violently, not loudly, but with truth. The one thing Brian had never been able to control. The morning of the all-hands meeting, Fairway Logistics felt different. Not tense, not chaotic, just charged. Like the air right before a match touches gasoline. Employees walked faster. Voices were quieter. Coffee stations emptied twice as quickly. Everyone sensed something was coming, even if they couldn't name it. At 9:45, department heads finished their rehearsals. At 10 Chaudreau, the conference room filled to capacity. At 10:15, the last remote employees signed into the video stream. At 10:29, the chatter died naturally, as if the room collectively held its breath. And at 10:30 exactly, I stepped to the front. Brian was already there, standing near the back wall, arms folded, chin raised, a smug expression plastered across his face like a mask glued on too tight. He looked like a man expecting applause. Or rescue. He would get neither. Good morning, I began, my voice steady. Thank you all for being here for our quarterly meeting. Today marks a turning point for Fairway Logistics. Slides appeared behind me. Performance charts, modernization plans, promotions, upcoming projects. People clapped politely. They leaned forward in their seats, nodding thoughtfully, asking questions. Brian stayed still, a stone in a river of motion. When I clicked to the next slide, the atmosphere shifted. Gone were the charts and promotions. In their place were redacted invoices, highlighted payments, a fake vendor name, a P.O. box. A collective inhale rippled across the room. This final portion, I said, is about transparency. Brian straightened. We recently conducted an internal audit of our financial operations. What we discovered was deeply troubling. One of our regional managers has spent years routing money through a vendor that does not exist. Brian's face tightened. I clicked again. The slide zoomed into the vendor's mailing address. A P.O. box, registered to Ashley Whitman, Brian's wife. This time the gasp was audible. Brian shot up from his seat. This is garbage. I lifted a hand. Sit. My voice wasn't loud, just final. He froze, not because he respected me, but because the room did. We have invoices, I continued. Email chains, routing numbers, timestamps, IP logs, signatures, all pointing to one individual. The next slide appeared. A digital audit log. Authorizing signature, Brian A. Whitman. Silence pressed against the walls. Effective immediately. I said Brian Whitman is terminated from his position at Fairway Logistics. He will be permanently barred from all corporate facilities. We will also pursue full civil restitution. People shifted, looked at one another, some with shock, some with satisfaction, some with relief. Because predators leave fingerprints, and Brian had left them everywhere. Security approached. He backed away like a cornered animal. You set me up. This is revenge. You've always hated me. No, I cut in softly. I stopped fearing you. There's a difference. The room watched every second, every breath, every unraveling stitch of a man who'd built his identity on control. Security took his arms. He struggled once, then again, then wilted. His knees buckled. His voice cracked, barely a whisper. They escorted him out without another sound. 19 years of ego, gone in 9 minutes. The door clicked shut behind him. I turned back to the room, and the silence slowly transformed into something else. Something alive. Purpose. Now I said gently, let us talk about building something better. The rest of the meeting wasn't celebration, it was clarity. We talked structure, integrity, growth, employee protections, new training programs, a safer workplace, paths for promotion. People asked thoughtful questions. They weren't scared. They were hopeful. Fairway was no longer a company run by fear, disrespect, or a man who mistook volume for leadership. It was a company being reborn. That night my phone buzzed. A message from Liam. A photo. A pencil sketch, hyper-detailed, beautifully shaded. a phoenix bursting out of a filing cabinet, the wings made of shredded paper and invoices, flames curling into spreadsheets. Underneath it, handwritten in bold letters, "Some things burn so better things can fly." I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't just a drawing. It was a truth. A quiet, powerful truth. From a boy who had spent years being told his art meant nothing by the same man who had stolen far more than money. I typed back, "Would you consider turning this into a mural for our design wing?" He responded a minute later, "Only if I can sign it." I smiled. Of course I wrote, "It's your fire." A week later, I got a call from an art school in Chicago. They congratulated me not for anything I'd done, but because they'd just admitted Liam into their program. Full scholarship. He had applied with a rebuilt portfolio, new pieces, fresh designs, a confidence I'd never heard in his voice before. His mentor from our UX team had helped him submit everything. He hadn't told me he applied. When I called him, my voice trembled. "Why didn't you say anything I asked?" "I wanted to try," he said softly. "And I wouldn't have tried if you hadn't reminded me I matter." I closed my eyes. That single sentence landed deeper than any victory I'd ever achieved. Because that was the core of this entire story. Not revenge, not power, not money, not corporate takeovers. It was about a kid who needed one adult, just one, to say, "You are worth something. Your dreams are real. You are allowed to be more than someone else's fear." 3 months later, Liam left for school. We had a small family dinner, just my parents, him and me. Quiet, warm, gentle. The kind of evening that heals what childhood fractures. Before he left, he handed me a drawing. It was me, standing in front of a building with my name on it, holding a torn check. In the corner, in tiny letters, he'd written, "Thank you for believing in me," when he didn't. I framed it in my office the next morning. People asked what it meant. I told them it was a reminder of where we started. And as for Brian, he sued, of course. Claimed wrongful termination. Claimed conspiracy. Claimed I sabotaged him. The judge dismissed the case before the first hearing finished. He lost his pension, lost any chance of employment in logistics, lost his reputation. Word spread quickly. No one wanted to hire a man with fraud on his record. Last I heard, he'd moved to Indiana, working inventory at a chain hardware store. The irony was almost poetic. He used to brag about running warehouses. Now he counted screws in one. He tells anyone who will listen that his life was ruined by me. Let him. People like him always need a villain, so they never have to face who they really are. I don't need to defend myself. I know the truth. I lived it. I rebuilt it. I am still rebuilding it, surrounded by people who work with purpose, guided by a quiet kid who finally believes in himself, and grounded by a clarity I didn't have before. The clarity that revenge is never about shouting. It's about building something so solid, so dignified, so untouchable, that even the loudest voices can't shake it. And when you walk away, you don't look back. Except maybe once, to smile. When the dust finally settled, when the legal papers were signed, the threats dissolved into silence, and Brian's shadow no longer stretched across our lives, something unexpected happened. My world got quiet. Not empty, not lonely, just quiet. The kind of quiet you don't notice until you realize you've been living in noise for years, the noise of surviving. Fighting, proving, defending, bracing, ending. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't bracing for anything. The company thrived. Liam thrived. My parents were proud in a way that didn't need words. And for the first time, I had space to ask myself something I'd never dared to ask before. Who am I when no one is trying to tear me down? Liam left for school 3 months after the reckoning. We had dinner the night before he moved, a small, quiet dinner with my parents and him. No dramatic speeches, no tears at the table, just warmth, laughter, a soft, gentle kind of pride that filled the room like candlelight. He seemed taller that night, not physically, but in spirit, like his spine finally remembered how to straighten without fear. He pulled me aside before dessert. "I want you to have this," he said, handing me a carefully folded piece of thick sketch paper. When I opened it, I couldn't breathe for a moment. It was a drawing of me standing in front of Fairway Logistics' shoulders, firm the building behind me, alive with light. In my hand was the torn check. But instead of falling apart, it glowed golden radiant, transforming into birds flying out of my palm. And in the bottom right corner, in the softest handwriting, "Thank you for believing in me when he didn't." I didn't hug him. I pulled him in. We stood like that for a long time. Two people who came from the same family, but somehow managed to grow in opposite worlds, now rebuilding each other piece by piece. The next morning, we drove him to the station. He boarded the train with a new backpack, a new sketchbook, and a new life ahead of him. As the train pulled away, he looked out the window and pressed his hand to the glass, not in a dramatic goodbye, but in a quiet promise. I'm going to make something of myself. I press my hand against the window too. Not in farewell, in faith. Fairway changed too. Not dramatically, not overnight, but steadily. The warehouse crew, the heartbeat of the company, started attending strategy meetings. People who had never been noticed suddenly had voices. Our customer service department redesigned their entire workflow. Our design team pitched a full rebrand with Liam's Phoenix mural becoming the centerpiece. The day they painted it on the wall, employees crowded around the reveal. The Phoenix burst out of flames made of invoices' wings shaped from swirling paperwork, each feather a subtle nod to resilience. And at the bottom corner, in small but proud letters, L. Whitman. People asked, "Is he related to?" I said, "He's himself." That was enough. As for me, I rebuilt too. Not loudly, not publicly, quietly. I started journaling again, the kind of long, reflective writing I'd abandoned during the scramble of entrepreneurship. I took long walks without my phone. I signed up for a digital art class, not because I wanted to become an artist, but because I wanted to understand the world Liam lived in so naturally. My boyfriend, patient, kind grounding, stood by me through late nights and early mornings. We grew stronger, not because of the drama, but in spite of it. He never asked for details I wasn't ready to share. He just held space for the woman I was becoming. And my parents, they worried less, smiled more, held me closer. My mother once said while stirring tea in her kitchen, "You didn't just save Liam, Tina, you saved a part of yourself too." She wasn't wrong. For years I had fought to be seen, heard, respected, believed. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that I didn't need anyone's permission to exist fully. Revenge hadn't taught me that. Healing had. As for Brian, his life shrank, not because I crushed it, but because the truth did. He moved 2 states away, found a job doing inventory at a chain hardware store, told coworkers exaggerated stories about betrayal, villains, conspiracies. If someone listened long enough, he always reached the same line. My niece ruined my life. Maybe he believes that. Maybe he needs to. People like Brian can't stand in front of a mirror without blaming the reflection. But that's his story to cling to. I don't belong in it anymore. 6 months after the meeting, I stood alone in my office looking at Liam's framed drawing above my desk. Evening sun spilled through the windows, turning the golden birds in the sketch into actual light. I traced the edge of the frame with my fingertip, not because it reminded me of the past, but because it reminded me of the promise I made myself the moment Brian tore that check in half. I will never let someone tear me in half again. And I didn't. I rebuilt with intention, clarity, and quiet power. A kind of power that doesn't scream, doesn't destroy, doesn't need to be proven. A power that builds, restores, protects. A power that walks away. Because the strongest revenge isn't fire. It's foundation. It's becoming someone so whole, so steady, so untouchable, that no one's cruelty can crack the surface. I closed my journal, turned off the office lights, and stepped into the hallway, not looking back. Well, maybe once. Just long enough to smile.